And good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Kaufman Corner, proudly brought to you by our friends at GAN Asphalt and Concrete for all your parking lot needs. Very nice to have the folks at GAN with us and being a part of our podcast each and every week. With us, as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli from Rany on the Royals, Robin Rany on the Royals, and of course, one of the co-founders of Baseball Prospectus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. You can catch my show at 810whb.com. Rany, good evening. How are you?
I am doing well, Soren. It's a day after another Patrick Mahomes magical performance, and I'm in a good mood. And the
Yeah.
Royals seem to be making smart decisions, and I don't know what to do with my hands. So
Yeah, and that is one of the biggest things that you no doubt have heard, and we're going to play a couple of the highlights and discuss a couple of the major talking points. But just your overall reaction to the press conference announcing Matt Quatraro, all of the hubbub around it. I assume you heard my conversation with JJ Piccolo.
hmm
Just what's your overall reaction to that so far?
well, first off, we learned how to pronounce Matt Quatraro's name.
Yes,
I think we did. Hopefully, we did. I'm very sympathetic to somebody with a difficult to pronounce name, as you are.
as I am.
Um, so so hopefully, we won't make that mistake in the future. But no, my reaction was like, I don't want to say it's too good to be true, but as a Royals fan, I'm conditioned to just assume that the Royals, even if, when they make the right decision, they'll make the right decision for the wrong reasons, or there'll be something that I disagree with, and it's it's frankly kind of an uncomfortable feeling to realize that the Royals are not just doing things that I agree with, but they're saying all the things that I agree with. What the hell am I here for? They don't need me anymore. What's going on, man?
I love it. You've been put out to pasture, Randy.
They've made me obsolete.
It does. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. It's like, wait a minute, I've been the conscience, been the voice of the conscience for so long, and trying to describe what could be done, how this could be put together. If now they're going to do it the way you want it, well, like what role do you serve? Right? Like, I hear where you're coming from, but you're not going to do everything you want. Do
Of
you
course.
really, did you have that impression that everything that you want to happen with the ball club is now automatically going to happen?
No, that's certainly not automatically going to happen. But the fact it's like a winning streak. Like if the Royals win 7 in a row, I don't expect them to win every single game the rest of the season. But I'll be damned impressed that they won 7 in a row. And right now the Royals are on like I don't know, a 12-game winning streak or something. This is kind of historic for them. Yes, they will make decisions I disagree with. Yes, they will annoy me. Yes, we will have things to complain about on this show. But what really struck me was, I mean, even last week we knew that they were hiring Matt Quatraro, the number one guy on our list, but we still wanted to hear what he had to say at the press conference. He kind of nailed it. I mean, maybe he didn't say every single thing I wanted him to say, but he certainly didn't say anything I didn't want him to say. He
Okay.
talked about the importance of process, and I know the word process has been tarnished slightly by the previous general manager, and the way that trusting the process didn't always that trust was not always rewarded, although sometimes it was. But I think process oriented decision making is far better than results oriented decision making, because you cannot control the results, whether it's baseball or in life. I don't tell my kids I expect you to get an A. I tell my kids I expect you to study hard and do your best. All right, you focus on the process, the results will take care of themselves. So I appreciated that aspect of his comments. um, I also uh, appreciated the fact that he very much talked about the data and the analysis part of things, but also talking about using that as a tool, uh,
Right.
and and that and one of the things he said that actually probably the quote I agreed with, I thought was most important, was talking about how what makes a team successful isn't having more data like that. All the teams have the data is pretty similar in terms of how much data each team has. It's how they use it. It's about getting everybody in the organization communicating well what that data does for us. And I've heard that from insiders in successful organizations, that it's not simply about, oh, we've got, more, computing power than the Royals. It's about when when the data says something, it's communicated to the manager, it's communicated to the coaches, it's communicated to the players in a manner in which they understand. If you go to a player and say, well, you the your you start bringing out the physics and talking about vectors and vertical angles to a jock, that's not going to work. But if you talk about it in terms of the movement on your pitch, and or better still, you talk about how his finger placement on the baseball is going to get him more movement. Like there's a vernacular that is key, but the person who should be delivering that probably isn't going to be your data guy. There's going to be the guy in the middle. There's going to be the coach who understands the data, but who also has the respect of the player. And that's how a lot of these successful organizations work. Everybody, there's a link in the chain. Every link in the chain knows its role, and that data filters down onto the field in an organic fashion. And I think that's something that Quatraro was kind of hinting at. And I think that's actually a very important part of the process too. So all the things he said, I was happy with what I heard.
Let's hear a little bit of that, because I pulled some of his comments from the press conference. We'll start with it. The fact that he does come, like you said, from a strong analytics background in Tampa. He comes from having been under Tito Francona, who obviously was around analytics in Boston, and now obviously with the Guardians. They're very analytically inclined. And I actually asked him this question during the press conference, because I pointed out Francona, and that in Francona's book, there's a passage where he talks about he wrote this book leaving the Red Sox and before he got to the Guardians. And he talked about all the numbers and all the analytics that they were given each day there in Boston. And he said, you get these optimum lineups and based upon who they were facing. And there are times that, like, it would say David Ortiz bats 8th. And one day, the analytics guys came down, and he took the lineup and he handed it to the guy. He said, here, you take that, you go in that clubhouse right now, and you tell those guys that Big Papi's batting 8th. Take it and make that happen, which I thought was a great, it really quantified that, like, okay, all the data and all the math can be there, but you still got to get it, to your point, exactly what you were saying, to the people, and how that they will take it, buy into it, consume it, and how they can use it. This is Quatraro talking about basically how you put together the numbers, add it together with the people.
Yeah, you balance it, right? I mean, that's the key word. There's every part in life, right? There's balances, there's trade-offs. So, I mean, that extreme example that Tito gave you, some of that is handedness, who you're facing that night, how you want to split up your righties and lefties, who are contact guys, who are swing and miss guys. So you're not bunching everybody together and becoming easy outs or more predictable for the other team's bullpen. I mean, so there's a ton of factors that go into how you would marry those numbers.
Is it easier today because it's happening? You would see, 10 years ago, Kyle Schwarber's not batting leadoff in the World Series, right? Because he doesn't steal bases and everything. So the industry, I know, is making the change. But is that something that has to start in the minor leagues? Is it an organizational philosophy that a guy has to be ready to hit in different spots or play different spots? And before they get to you, it can't be. It starts here with Matt Quatraro.
That's a good question. I can't speak on what the organizational minor league philosophy is on that here right now. I mean, we'll have a lot of discussions about that, but I think as a general point, guys are more comfortable being bounced around. There's very few teams that you look at right now where it's a set 1 to 9 every night. Now, some of them are, and some of them roll out the same all righty lineup, or those are their best guys. I think the way that we'll probably be constructed is, well, like I said, using all 26. So sometimes those spots in the lineup might juggle based on who we're facing and who's available that night or who's got a day off. So, I mean, I think those things are all things we will communicate to the players ahead of time, that, no one's going to get ambushed with, you've been hitting 3rd all year and now it's a big spot in August and we don't tell you anything, but all of a sudden you're hitting 8th. Like that. Those are things that I'm a big believer in, is getting out in front of those things, communicating and letting the guys know where we are.
All right. I a couple of things. One, I was taken aback by the fact that I don't know, he said, I don't know where the minor leagues are on that. Did that punch you in the face the way it punched me in the face. I was standing there looking at it. And this was this part of the conversation was they had him up in front of everybody. Then they did 2 breakouts. They took him over with the writers, and he talked to just the writers. Then they took him over to another room where all of us in the electronic media were. And so I was standing there, from me to my computer screen that I'm looking at you on, right? I was arm's length away from him. And that kind of hit me that, like, there wasn't a conversation, and I also was talking bigger picture of, just rounding it all together. I thought and he took it all the way to just the lineup. I'm not talking about the lineup. I'm talking about all of it coming together. And it's fine. I heard what he was saying, and he did say, yes, there's a place for the math, but you have to communicate it to the players. But were you a little surprised that there wasn't like, it can't just be here, right? That it has to start lower. And we'll get to some of the things that, JJ Picola said here in a little bit, but does that surprise you a little bit?
Maybe a little. I mean, he was kind of non-committal. It didn't sound like so much that, it doesn't matter what goes on. I think it was almost more a confession that I don't know exactly what the Royals have been doing at that level. Like, I mean, for the time that he was introduced to the media, from the first time I think he even spoke to the Royals about the job, was something like 2 weeks. Like, I'll give him a bit of a pass that he doesn't know every single process that's been in place. I mean, I'm far more concerned with what processes he wants to put into place. And I think, frankly, every team in baseball, not only do they do some different things in the minor leagues, but they, from one level to the next, like some teams in A-ball, they might be much more flexible with moving players in and out of the lineup. By the time you get to AAA, it might be more of a fixed lineup. I'm not as concerned about that. One of the things I think that he sort of hinted at, which I think is very valid and will hopefully make his job easier, is simply the fact that players today, compared to even like 10 years ago, are far, far more receptive to the idea of using data to inform decisions. Because, like you said, Kyle Schwarber, you brought the point up, Kyle Schwarber leading off. Like, if you had asked a Kyle Schwarber type to lead off 10, certainly 15 years ago, good dude who freaking led the National League in home runs, he would have rebelled. He would have rejected that idea. And now the idea of having, Aaron Judge and Kyle Schwarber, the 2 league leaders in home runs, both led off for significant chunks of the season. Frankly, I think that's maybe too aggressive in terms of putting your best hitter lead off if it leads to a lot more solo home runs. I'd prefer to have your best hitter batting second as much as possible. But like, the idea of your best hitter batting second is actually a very well sort of established principle now in the game. And if not all teams, certainly at least half the teams in baseball, I think, would agree with that. And the players do too. So I think the Royals, it's going to be so much easier for them to get buy-in from, I think, their players if they start to make changes like this, because they're not the first team through the breach. They're not the ones reinventing the wheel. They're doing what a lot of other teams are already doing, and players in the organization know what other teams are doing, and they've seen the success. They're getting their butts kicked by teams that are doing things this way. So I would like to think that this will be a layup for Quatraro to establish these sorts of decisions and get the players to buy in. That to me is like the penny ante. That's the base level. I'm curious to see how much farther he can take it with buy-in from the players.
Yeah, and I do think that's, I think it gets easier to get everyone to buy in if they hear it the moment they walk into the organization. I think that's the idea. The idea that Bobby Witt Jr.'s on-base percentage is going to be the key for him is, something he needs to hear from the very beginning. Not like, oh, we got a new manager. Here it is. These are the things that are now important. Change and adjust how you're doing things. It has to be ingrained from the beginning. So listen, the one thing I took away from it is it doesn't sound like, he's coming in with the program. They have a program in place that they believe in, right? And now it's up to him to apply all the processes at the highest level and make it come together. But
I hope that he has some input into that process that you're talking about, because if they're just letting him implement what they're already doing, that's frankly not enough of a change.
Okay, so let's hear this. This is from JJ Picola's conversation with me on Friday. talking about whether it was important for the organization to go outside and, in getting their new manager and bringing in somebody that was from outside the Royals organization.
When we started on this entire search, we didn't want to presume that anybody who was not from within the organization is the guy. We had a great deal of respect and, wish Pedro the best in Chicago. He's going to do a great job. We think very highly of Vance Wilson. We think very highly of Scott Thorman. So we didn't want to assume things that we just didn't know. I mean, you read things about different organizations, but when we got into the interviews and started digging deeper and then kind of debriefing after the interviews, it became more intriguing to us. And also, our front office, for the most part, if not all, everybody is going to be back next year. So, we want to surround ourselves with people who've done things differently so we can grow and learn and make the changes, the adjustments, however you want to say it, that are going to continue to happen in this game. And sometimes, and I've said this, several times within the organization, we got to be aware of our blind spots. But if we don't have anybody else around us who can tell us where our blind spots are, it's going to be difficult to figure out what they are. So that became something that was a little bit more important to us as we dove into the process, more so than the beginning. So it was a very fair process for everybody. In the end, we did feel like a new voice, different ideas would benefit our players. And as Matt said very well yesterday, that's what this is about. It's about our players.
So earlier, it sounds to me like the process, the thing I took away from that was, one, it was Matheny's got to go. It wasn't like, okay, we now have this. They do have a new way of doing things. And Derek, I put it up there on the screen, said a fresh perspective. But they didn't set out like, we need somebody to come in and tell us what we don't know. They went into the process, and I think it's very honest, which I think the Royals always are, a very honest organization. And as they got there, they realized this is what we want. And I think, somebody to tell us what our blind spots are. That's giant. And I think you marry the Royal success that they've had and being so supportive of their players and being an organization that everybody wants to work for, with hopefully the data and the analytics, you hopefully get the best of both worlds and get something that's stronger than either one.
Yeah, it's really interesting when I heard him speak on your show on, I believe, Friday, that on the one hand, almost all of what he said there was not only something you and I agree with, but like we almost took for granted this idea that they need a fresh perspective. Yes, they need somebody to come. They don't know what they don't know. They need somebody to come in and tell them what they don't know, and that's why you can't hire a Pedro Grifol, no matter how capable he is in isolation. He might be the perfect guy in Chicago, but the perfect guy for the Royals was somebody who wasn't with the Royals. And on the one hand, it's like JJ seems to get that, very, very strongly. There's no daylight between your perspective and my perspective and his perspective. Yes, they needed that, and it's no knock against Grifol and Scott Thorman and Vance Wilson, but they had to hire somebody with that perspective. And for he listed all the right reasons as to why they needed somebody from outside the organization. But sort of slipped into that was this the point he made about, like, we're bringing back pretty much the entire front office staff, and that left me that just kind of caught me off guard a little bit. And on the one hand, it's like, well, yeah, I guess they kind of are like, who are they going to fire? But on the other hand, it can't just be one guy. Like, we already are we have that slight misgiving that the guy that's been given the job of replacing Dayton Moore has been Dayton Moore's chief lieutenant for 15 years. How different is he going to be? And to his credit, JJ Piccolo if I didn't know that JJ Piccolo was part of the Royals organization for the last 15 years, if they had hired an outside GM and he had done exactly the same things that JJ has done so far, I'd be like, yeah, this guy, this guy's cleaning house in the manager spot and the pitching coach and bringing in a manager I want. Like, he's making all the decisions I would expect from an outside general manager. So I give him tons of credit for that. But if you're going to keep the entire front office staff and expect to find success, what you're essentially saying is that Dayton Moore by himself was the impediment to all the potential success that the Royals are going to have in the future. That Dayton Moore, had such an outsized influence on this organization that just removing him from the equation is going to fix this organization. That's a kind of that's a big statement to make, and I really feel like the Royals need to bring in more voices. I'm not saying they have to necessarily fire people, although maybe they should, but they need to bring in more than just the new manager. They're going to bring in a pitching coach. That's great. I would love to see them bring in addition to the major league pitching coach, to have it like an organizational pitching czar that oversees all the pitching development in the organization. That's the sort of role you might see a guy like Brian Bannister doing. But the other thing is, and this is something we are not hearing any rumors about, and I really think that would be I'm not going to say a mistake, but kind of they're falling short if they don't go out and get an assistant general manager from outside the organization. I mean, you look at so many teams around baseball, when they hire a GM from outside the organization, that guy almost always brings in an assistant also from outside the organization, not necessarily from the same place he came from. But the point is to bring in two fresh perspectives and try to meld the best of what both of these two front office guys have learned in their previous organizations. And for the fact that the Royals are hiring Piccolo from inside the organization, I think it makes it even more imperative that they need somebody in the front office that all the other people except for Piccolo are reporting to. They need somebody with real influence in the front office that comes from a different organization. So Quatraro is a great start, but I really am, that if there's one misgiving I have right now, it's that I'm just not sure they're getting enough fresh perspectives from outside the organization.
Yeah, and I think that they are, and I listen. I think if you're a pessimist and you wanted an overall, just imploding of the organization, you're not getting everything. You're not hearing everything now that's going to win you over. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. You're not, because the point that much of the front office, all the front office, staying the same. The pieces that are still there now, minus Dayton Moore, obviously. And I'm with you, and I hear that that's coming. Jeff Passan said that there are going to be individuals added, that there may not be changes, but there will be additions made. If that's the case, we're getting what you're talking about, Rany, and we're getting somebody to come in and be from another organization and have that kind of impact, hopefully, on it. That brings another fresh approach. If that happens, okay. Is there a scenario though where you can see that, like, largely the trade of the compensation pick for Drew Waters, that's being put at JJ Piccolo's feet. He got that done as the general manager this past year. The move to let go of Terry Bradshaw, we've talked about a number of times. Dayton Moore said in the press conference that it was 10 or 12 days before they actually did it that JJ Piccolo came to him and said, we need to do this. Those are signs that maybe there are a lot of things. And we had, one of the comments was, hey, maybe, and it was from Cotman. He said, or maybe the front office was doing all the right things, but it fell on complete deaf ears. That, and you hear from Randy, maybe the front office is set free now because they can be heard since Dayton left. I don't know. It's about being heard. I think Randy's point's a good one. It may be that there were ideas and a want to push forward, and Dayton was the brakes on everything. No, this is how we do things. We're going to stay here. I feel quite confident they will be much more transactional. I think they're hesitating a little bit to say, yes, we're going to move guys. And some of the conversations I've had with people around these different press conferences, they don't want to say, yeah, we're moving guys. Yeah, we're moving young guys. Yes, we're going to, we've got to break, we've got a good young core, but we've got to figure out, the depth piece, right? Like a catcher's got to go and a middle infielder's got to go. And we've got to do that. They don't want to advertise it because they don't want to, 6 months from now, have no good deal have materialized, be back in spring training with all the same people and have everybody going, well, where's all this change you were talking about? Right. I think they want to get it done. And I'm okay with that. I get it. But I do think there's something to be said for the phrase that I like to use, burning the boats behind everybody. Like, if you would say it's going to be done, that will somewhat motivate you instead of sitting back and being like, I kind of don't like this deal. this one doesn't work. Like, some change needs to happen. And if you put it out there, everybody, change is coming, it will motivate you to work harder to find the right change that's out there. I do think they're going to shake things up. I think there's going to be some movement. I think JJ Piccolo and the rest of this front office did have moves that they wanted to make, and we're maybe ready to say like, I think one of the things that's going to happen more often is it doesn't work here for you, right? And maybe it's not. I don't think if this front office were starting and Adalberto Mondesi were coming up, that Adalberto Mondesi would still be here. I don't think if this front office were in place with this manager and, Brad Keller was having the trials and tribulations that he had, I don't think Brad Keller would still be here. Like, I think that they will be willing to move on from guys much quicker. And I think that it is possible that is a big part of the problem. Yes?
Yeah, well, what's fascinating is that if the Royals succeed in doing all the things you say, making all these changes, being more transactional, holding players more accountable, and potentially developing players better than they have before, and it's with most of the same front office, with the subtraction of Dayton Moore, that is going to actually kind of retroactively impact the legacy of Dayton Moore. If it'd be one thing if you completely cleaned house and you brought in a whole new front office and they started doing a bunch of things. But if the same guys, like, that's why I am a little bit skeptical that you can train a front office that's been doing it one way for all these years to do things dramatically differently. And certainly there's pressure from on high with John Sherman, which is the best place for the pressure to come from, because the guy who signs your checks is going to have more of an impact on your behavior than anybody else. But if they do make that significant a change, it really does say, what was Dayton Moore doing? How was he inhibiting them from all these changes that you and I have been advocating for, and most Royals fans have been advocating for a long time? And obviously the way he was doing it wasn't working. So it would be very interesting if a couple years from now we'd look back and say, was JJ Piccolo Kaiser Soze all along? Like, was JJ Piccolo the reason why for the Royals all their success, in the middle of the Dayton Moore era? If he proves to be a successful GM and the Royals suddenly are, within a year or two, are contenders, something which took Dayton Moore 7 years, is, first time around, that, that makes it's going to make people think, was it Dayton Moore, or was it all these people that Dayton Moore had working under him who, once freed from his influence, were able to find success much more quickly? So, I just think that is a potential complication of all of this. But it would be a nice conversation for us to have, to look back and say, maybe JJ Piccolo actually knew what he was doing all along and just needed to have the shackles taken off to let him do his thing.
All right, let's hear one more from JJ. This is about, I asked him, one, we talked a little bit about the fact that they've got this, it's great that they had all these guys debut, but they're all going to be up at the same time, right? They're all going to hit arbitration. They're all going to hit free agency at the same time. I said, do you need to kind of change that timeline? And do you need to go out and get some guys signed, right? Like, basically, the Brady Singer, Vinny Pasquantino.
This is the one that struck me most. The enthusiasm in his voice. He barely even let you finish. He wanted to answer it so enthusiastically.
Yeah, I basically asked him, do the Royals need to get long-term deals done with players like this if they're going to help build and sustain the organization?
Yeah, I think it does, and it also gives you controlled costs, which helps you build out the roster because you have fixed costs. So that it's helpful in various ways. But they are things that we have not engaged in deep talks yet, but we've spoken to the people that we need to right now. So we've planted the seeds, and those do take a little bit of time, but we're going to work hard to try to lock up guys that we feel like we need to lock up. Sometimes it happens early in a guy's career, like we witnessed this year in Seattle, and sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years to lock a guy up. But the rhythm and the timing of that is not real predictable. So we just have to have our sights set on it, collect our thoughts, be ready to enter those types of discussions at the right time. And then we need the other party to know that there's a willingness to negotiate here and try to lock down certain players that will be part of our long-term future.
So I was going to say what you don't get there. You started that way. Once you finished the question, he started answering. But when I was listening, he twice started trying to say yes while you were still asking him the question. Like he was excited, like that. Dayton Moore plays things close to the vest, and JJ Piccolo usually does too. But he couldn't hide his excitement about signing some long-term contracts for these young players. So if there's one thing that I am convinced we will see between now and the end of spring training, it is some long-term deals, or at least they will make every effort. I would be very surprised if Brady Singer specifically is not signed to a long-term contract by opening day. I think Vinny Pasquantino, you and I have talked about a lot. I think that's very likely. They would love to do one with Bobby Witt. Obviously, that one's much more difficult just from a standpoint of how do you value him. That would be the big one. And he's right. Like the urgency here, right now there's a million other things they need to do and get, fill out their coaching staff and the front office. This is the sort of thing that can come together later, because whatever you think of the value of these players does not change between now and the first day of spring training. Like that's a fixed commodity, and it's just a matter of agreeing on a price. And historically, the Salvador Perez contract was announced during spring training, Alex Gordon's long-term extension, spring training. So this is not something that's imminent, I don't think, and that's fine. But I do think we're going to see some of that, and it's heartening that that's something that JJ Piccolo is very motivated to do and thinks he can, because, as much as I know Dayton Moore wanted to do that and cared about his players and wanted to foster, a sense of community and have these guys around for the long haul. I mean, he was never able to get one done with Eric Hosmer and Mike Moustakas and Lorenzo Cain and, some of those core guys. I'm hoping that the Royals will be more successful at doing that this time around.
Yeah. And I think I liked what he said, it gives us cost certainty. Right? Like, what you've got, and it allows you, when you put those things in place and say, okay, I know what this is going to cost, and I know what this is going to cost, and here it is. Okay, now you can fill the other stuff in. When you're like, well, I don't know if he's going to be here next year, that gets a lot more difficult. So, yes, it assures that you're going to pay some guys. Yes, somewhere along the way, there'll be bad contracts too, right? If you start doing it, it will be. But you have to have the confidence. I think one of the things that it always struck me that with the Royals' unwillingness to do that was they didn't really know who the good guys were. Okay. And that continues to haunt me a little bit in the sense that, we've talked about the pitching, just that 2018 class, 5 guys, and everybody agrees. Everybody was ready to sit there and tell you it takes 10 good arms to find one good pitcher. And they're happy to preach that, talk about the numbers when it defends why all their guys don't get to the big leagues. They're happy to do that. But then you give them 5 guys out of one draft class, and all 5 of them are still there. It says to me, you don't know which guy's going to be good. And they have to be able to identify that quicker. That's one of the things that I like about the Rays is they quickly decide that guy over there is better than this guy right here, and we're moving him, right? Like the Randy Arozarena deal is to me the biggest example of the Cardinals. I don't even remember who it was that was actually the guy the deal was supposed to be. You might look it up, but
yeah, I know who it is. But
by everybody's assessment in that deal was not the centerpiece of what the Rays were getting. It was somebody else, and I can't. Was it Martinez?
There was Jose Martinez, but no, Rosarino was the guy, but it was the guy they gave up, which was Matt Liberatore, who was a first-round high school pitcher. That was the guy that people were surprised. You talk about you don't know what you get out of the draft. Right. The Rays drafted this. He was actually the one pick before Brady Singer, I recall. Right. I remember because going as that draft was progressing and it was getting close to the Royals pick, it was quite shocking that Matt Liberatore and Brady Singer, both consensus top 5 or at least top 10 guys, were both available. And then right before the Royals pick, the Rays, again, you're thinking, these guys are falling because they have huge draft demands. And yet the Rays, one of the smallest markets in the sport, took Liberatore, and then the Royals did take Singer. But Liberatore was a high school guy, but really well thought of. And people thought, oh, the Rays got a steal here. And then 2 years later, he hadn't even gotten out of A ball, and he had pitched well, but they, for whatever reason, they metrics, they decided either they thought he was overhyped as a prospect, or they just really loved Rosarina, but they got transactional.
But Rosarina was not considered to be the centerpiece. And you're right. That's their part where they decided on a guy early. No, we can do better. We're moving it for this. But even they were the only ones, like in their building, they called it the Rosarina deal. I remember Jeff Passan telling the story that everybody else thought it was for him. And they told Passan after making the deal, the real guy in this is a Rosarina. And nobody had really heard about him. Why are the Cardinals giving up an outfielder? If they're giving him up, he must not be good, because they know who all the good outfielders are. Because every year they've got 2 new ones that they're putting in there. And Passan tells the story that no, they before he ever broke out said, this is the guy, this is the heart of the deal, this is why we did the deal. And that was, they identified before he was going to be the guy. If you knew what Mondesi's career was going to be, and you could have moved him at the peak of his prospect, value, I mean, what would you have now in his place? And that's, you have to be able to identify and be confident in your identification and make the move. That is one of the things I think they've got to get better at. And I think if you're willing to sign a guy, you're saying these are the keepers, these are not. Right? If you're willing to sign somebody, you're actually saying we feel like we know who the good players are.
I agree, but I feel like the ability to, separate the wheat from the chaff and trade the chaff before everyone else knows the chaff goes hand in hand with having a player development process that is better than everyone else's, because then you actually know that this guy's not going to get better. If we could build a time machine and tell the Royals what Daniel Lynch and Chris Bubich would be 2 years ago, and you of course you would have if you could have traded Daniel Lynch was a top 50 prospect 2 years ago. Chris Bubich was very well regarded, especially after his rookie season. And if you're the Royals, we'll say, gee, we should have traded them then. But here's the problem. I'm not sure if the Royals traded either of those guys 2 years ago and trade them to an organization that knows how to develop pitching. That might actually look like a disastrous trade for the Royals right now, because those guys have been pitching a lot better than they have for the Royals. So that's why I'm like a little bit nervous about the Royals making any moves with their pitchers right now, because the Royals pitching is like the stock market right now. It is so depressed that you really want to sell low when you could have sold a high a year or two ago. And so to me, the before you get that transactional, you have to know that the player development process you have in place, that you like in order to separate from the wheat from the chaff, you have to identify talent. But you can't identify talent if you don't know how to develop talent. And I think that's where the Royals are now. So I think, yes, I agree that needs to be something going forward, but I'm okay if they maybe wait a year and see if they can actually get some player development process in place so that they know what they have. Because the same organization that could not get a minor league pitcher, let alone a major league pitcher, to pitch well this year is not necessarily a front office that I trust to trade the right guys right now. Because God forbid they should trade, I don't know, Jackson Kowar or someone like that, and he shows up in spring training with, doesn't even have to be the Rays, it could be the Brewers or the Mariners, a sort of another organization that is well known for developing pitchers, and they show up in spring training and they've got a new pitch. They're throwing a cutter. Like, one of the things that really struck me is that the Royals were like the fewest cutters of any team in the major leagues this year. Like, the cut fastball it's not a trick pitch. It's not like some newfangled invention. The cut fastball has made a huge difference for pitchers for decades now. And God forbid one of these guys shows up with a new pitch that they hadn't thrown before, and suddenly they're just like dominating. And the Royals gave up on them for nothing, for pennies on the dollar compared to where they were a year or two ago. So let's see if we can get some of those guys to throw a new pitch for us, or start using their best pitch more often. Let's start there before we start trading away guys and then regretting it later.
All right, let's hear another one from Matt Quatraro again from his debut press conference, or his announcing, what would you call it, an introductory press conference. This is Quatraro talking about what it takes to win in a small market.
Pitching you put good pitching on the field, you got a really good chance of winning. And I think one of the things that JJ's talked about a lot in the process is, look, baseball, the obvious narratives are the big spenders and the little spenders, right? But that doesn't really tell the whole story of what goes on the field. A lot of that goes into name recognition, but talent is talent, regardless of your experience level, your name recognition. So what I look at is winning those decisions on the margins.
I like that, winning those decisions on the margins. And he went on and he talked about, like, if you have a 51-49, hey, it's almost 50-50, but you get a lot of 51s, right? It's going to add up. And we know that's what the shift is about. Yes, somebody might hit it the other way and against the shift. And when they do, you look like a fool, because the guy who, in the traditional alignment would have been standing where shortstop is. It's like, oh, if he'd just been back over there. But if time and time again, you're 60-40, he went all the way down to 51-49, but you go 60-40, 60-40, 60-40, you're going to make a lot of ground up, right? By doing that kind of thing. And so I thought that was good. But also, I mean, he wasn't afraid to just flat out say it. Pitching.
Well, what I'm grateful for, yes, pitching is important, but the danger, because I mean, if you asked Dayton Moore in 2006 when he was hired, he would have given you the same. How do you win? Pitching is the currency of baseball. The issue I have isn't. I don't disagree. Pitch, yes, you need to pitch well. The Royals right now, give them a decent pitching staff, and they can win in a small market. The danger is to extrapolate from that and say, because you can't win without pitching, that we need to put all of our resources in terms of draft capital, in terms of money, into pitching. Because the danger there is, while as important as pitching is, it's also far more unpredictable than hitting. And as we've seen from the Royals 2018 draft class, you could have, you can spend your top 5 picks, 5 for the top 50 picks in the draft, and it looks, great on paper, even for 2-3 years afterwards, they're coming to the minor leagues, and they're still much less likely to hit at the major league level. And so while pitching is important, it's not about spending capital, spending resources on it. It's about finding pitching wherever it is, developing, like basically identifying and developing that pitching talent better than any other organization. And so I think it's instructive that he's coming from the Rays. I'm looking here at the Rays, their team this season, right? Their pitching staff, which was third in the league in third fewest runs allowed in the American League. You look at, they had 3 starters this year who had made 25 starts or more with an ERA of under 3. Which, the Royals haven't had. They've had one guy with an ERA under 3 in the last 25 years. That's Zach Greinke in 2009, right? They had 3 dudes. One of them, Shane McClanahan, supplemental first-round pick of the team out of college, the same 2018 draft that we talk about with Brady Singer and Jackson Kowar and Daniel Lynch. He was taken 2 picks before Kowar and Lynch, so technically the Royals, I guess, couldn't have gotten him. But they this was 10 picks after Singer. So the point is, they got him in the draft. He's been great. All right. But another guy, Drew Rasmussen, was a 6th-round pick out of college by the Brewers. They got transactional. They got this guy when they traded Willie Adams, the shortstop, that they had an excess of hitting talent. They brought up Wander Franco, who was the best prospect in baseball 18 months ago. So they're like, well, this guy's expendable. And he was a very good shortstop, at 31 home runs for the Brewers this year. But they got Drew Rasmussen, who gave them a 2.84 ERA this year. And then the third guy is a dude named Jeffrey Springs. Have you heard of him? I barely heard of this guy. He's a 30th round pick by the Rangers. Did they even trade for him? They traded 2 guys who have pitched in the minor. No, they got him for the Reds. The Rangers traded him to the Red Sox, and then a year later, the Red Sox traded him to the Rays for 2 guys who they're still in the minor leagues. He was not a prospect, and he had a decent season in the bullpen in 2021 at the Rays. Moved into the rotation this year and had a 2.46 ERA in 135 innings. That is pitching development. So yes, pitching is important, but it doesn't mean you go out and spend every first-round pick. It doesn't mean you go out and give a $30 million a year contract. You don't need to do that. You can do it by identifying and making pitchers that you do have better, and identifying pitchers, whether they're in the draft or from other organizations that have unharnessed talent that you can then improve upon. So yes, pitching is important, but my hope is he understands that just because pitching is important doesn't mean that you have to, you can still focus resources on the hitting side and develop the pitching more intelligently.
I agree, and I think the other part about it is, and Quatraro said something that development doesn't stop when you get to the big leagues, right? Which
Yep.
to me, a couple things. One, I remember Jake Odorizzi, right? A conversation I think I've mentioned this before. When Odorizzi, I think got to the Twins or something, and he was interviewed and said, "Well, when did you really take off?" He's like, "When I got to the Rays." They gave me a new pitch. Like they took a guy who was a good prospect, been on the top 100 list and been coming up. And then they said, okay, here are all the things you do well. And here's this, go do this too. They taught him his changeup, I think is what it was. And they gave him a new weapon. Right. And I think you can find, and we'll see how much we get into the Astros here in a minute, but if you can go find guys that have the raw stuff, like it's almost like I think if you can find good coaching and development people, then you give somebody a good chunk of granite and a good hammer and a good chisel, and they'll create you a pitcher, right? Find a good athlete, find a guy who can throw with velocity, because there's a minimum velocity necessary, as much as old time guys don't want to admit it. The modern game has power stuff, but then in addition to that, now teach them the changeup, teach them how to spin the breaking ball, work with the different grips. That's where you can, into your point, create pitching without just massive amounts of resources being put towards it. And I think that's kind of the flaw in what Dayton Moore was doing in the build it back approach was, well, we're just throwing every draft pick at whatever, the top pitching guy is. And that's going to get us there. And it hasn't. And what we saw was the reverse was over on the hitting side. They weren't using all the resources on it, and they were having more success because they had a process that was developing better hitters. And that's what has to happen on the pitching side. And I understand that Matt Quatraro gets it. Now does JJ Piccolo get it? And I think he does. But can he put the people together? So back to the front office. If the front office stays with all the people they've got, but there's 8 new positions, because one of the things that the Rays have is an army of coaches, right? Passon was going on about that they have coaches who coach the coaches, that there's no shortage of people. And I've always said it, like, I almost feel like, players need their own pitching coach and their own hitting coach, right? Because it's like a golf swing doctor. Like one guy's credited with teaching this guy a swing, but he sucks. He gets fired by 3 other guys because he can't connect with them. Lots of coaches means lots of opportunities for somebody to connect and find the approach that works for each individual. And that could be in the front office as well. And I do believe I talked to enough people around these press conferences that there are hires coming beyond just the pitching coach and the bench coach. Right. And so
which is very, very heartening to hear. I mean, obviously we're going to get a better sense of just how far the Royals are willing to take this when we see who they hire as their pitching coach and see who else they bring in. But you look at the organization, especially the organizations that are not necessarily have the payroll of like the Dodgers in terms of the resources, where they spend their money is on massive coaching staffs, right? It's not just, we talk about how the coaches, even the best coaches in baseball, don't make a ton of money. And that is definitely an inefficiency that the Royals could exploit. But what the other way to exploit that is to just hire a bunch of them. To me, the prime example of this was actually the Giants last year, when they had really the most, I would say the most shocking regular season of any team in the 21st century, 106 or 107 wins from a team nobody expected to be in the playoffs. And they have, I don't know, 10, 12, coaches that work with the players on the side. Think about it. Like if you are a hitter and there's one hitting coach and there's 14 guys on the team, you get 1/14 of the hitting coach's time. And that's why you see it's more and more. I mean, 10 years ago, every team had one hitting coach. Now most teams, including the Royals, have like an assistant hitting coach. There are rules about how much time the assistant hitting coach can spend on the field, but like because that's the thing now. Well, what if you had so right now you've got two coaches for 14 hitters. What if you have 7 or 8 coaches? It's essentially like every player has his own personal tutor. Well, it's the difference between being in a classroom in school with 20 other kids or 40 other kids and one teacher, or having a private tutor. I think that the gains that some of those players on the Giants made last year is testament to the fact that if you have intensive coaching, you can make players better. And I think the Royals need to bring in a lot of guys. I'd love to see them announce, 10 new hires on the pitching side of things that are going to work at every level, so that these guys can get one-on-one instruction.
Rany, we talked about it. I think the most mesmerizing thing of this past baseball season, the most glaring statement of where Major League Baseball as an industry is right now, is when a contending team's pitching coach left mid-season to go coach in college baseball. When the Twins lost their pitching coach to LSU, by the way, a university that's broke, right? Like they're not Texas with a $15 billion endowment. Like they struggle to pay the bills. And yes, they can hire Brian Kelly to be their football coach and give him a $90+ million guaranteed deal and all these things. It's staggering how they do business. And I'm not saying every university should be like this, but they went out and said, we want to get back to being LSU in baseball. And they hired away and doubled the price tag on the pitching coach of the Minnesota Twins, right? Like, and you're like, wow, what'd they give him? Did they give him $5 million? No, they gave him like $600,000 or $450,000. I can't remember what the number was. Like he was making like $300,000 with the Twins. Think about that, and so if there's a bunch of guys that know hitting and they're working in the minor leagues and toiling for, tens of thousands of dollars, then pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars and get them all in your organization. And I think that's exactly what the Rays have done. And I expect that to be part of the process for the Royals. I expect Matt Quatraro to be like, listen, guys, like, this is what we need. Here are the people. Go find them, right? Here's a list of guys. Let's make it happen. That to me is
100%. And like, I think it's bad for baseball that the Minnesota Twins would let a guy go, to a college program over money. But it's good for the Royals if one of the 4 teams in their division don't, values, whether it's the front office or ownership, values coaching so lightly. That's a huge advantage the Royals can build upon in this division. And none of the teams in this division are, I think, at the forefront of spending money on coaching. And if ownership is committed in Kansas City, that is somewhere that they could really have an edge, and it may take several years for the rest of the division to catch up. Once they see the Royals having success with that. But absolutely, spend the money, flood the zone with coaching, and take the talent you've already got, fix it up. And because we've talked about, there's a lot of interesting arms in this organization that all have a bunch of, well, but he can't do this, but he's got talent. I mean, from Frank Mazzucato to Alec Marsh. They're 2 promising pitchers in very different ways who also have limitations in very different ways. Both of those guys could end up being starting pitchers, top of the rotation guys in the major leagues. Both of them could end up not pitching in the majors at all. The difference is going to be the kind of coaching they get. You've already put millions of dollars into Frank Mazzucato's signing bonus. Take 10% of that $3.7 million and give that to a couple of coaches that will make him the best version of himself he can be. Yeah. And I'm really hoping this is going to be, over the next probably 8 weeks. I would say most coaches are signed to their organization for the following year by January. So this is not something it's going to go on for the next 4 or 5 months. The Royals really, over the next 6 to 8 months, the winter meetings, Christmas holidays, by January, I'm really hoping we will hear, and it'll be one of those. It's not going to be a big press release, but we're going to just see a list of these are new people working in the organization, and they all have experience working as pitching instructors on some capacity, whether it's with major league organizations, college, driveline. Like there's talent everywhere. Just like there's talent for players, there's talent for coaches everywhere. I would love to see the Royals get creative here and hire a bunch of these dudes.
And to your point, we're going to hear about the bench coach and the pitching coach. Like that is going to make headline news, and there'll be releases put out about that. But the overall organizational coaching structure and maybe some of the front office stuff will probably be one release with all the different things. That's what they usually do when they go. The Royals have announced their minor league coaching staff. It is bang, and they give every guy that's there. So it is. You're right. It's going to take a little time before we hear all of that, and so. We don't need to panic if we're not hearing every little name that's out there. And I'm assuming, I think either the pitching coach or the bench coach is going to come from the Guardians. Like I'll be shocked if one of those two jobs isn't filled by somebody from the Guardians that Quatraro has worked with in the past and has a relationship with. I think that'll be interesting. I think it'll also be interesting to see who does Pedro Grifol take. Does he take anybody from the Royals organization?
Right. The rumor is Mike Chozar might be poached, and I mean, all's fair in love and war. I mean, it's one guy I think is a reasonable expectation for him to take that. I mean, but that also means the Royals it's fair game for them to go back to the Rays and grab at least, if they don't take the pitching coach from the Guardians, hopefully it'll be from the Rays organization. So
right.
But yes, we will see what happens there.
Yeah, not going to be Kyle Snyder.
No, that would be nice, but no. The Royals had their chance with him, just like they had their chance with Brian Bannister. Although I still hear smoke that maybe Bannister could come back. I don't know. That would be. I don't see him as the pitching coach, but as sort of the minor league pitching coordinator, as a guy who oversees. Hey, Brian Bannister was thinking about these things in 2009 when nobody was thinking about these things. So I think he would be a fine hire. But again, to me, it's not even the name of the pitching coach. It's going to be how many of these guys are they hiring?
Right. All right. Anything in particular do we want to hit upon? I know we've gone a long way with a lot of this stuff, so we may have to save some of it or all of it. But anything in particular? We did just have the World Series. The Astros win it in 6. Any major takeaway you want to put out there that the Royals ought to be taken from the Astros and/or Phillies?
Well, I think next week maybe we can really dive into those teams and the lessons we can learn. I think the key though is that the Astros remain the gold standard by which we talk about pitching development. And I don't think I fully appreciated until we got to the World Series and I really broke down their roster how much this is a completely different, certainly pitching staff, than the one that won the World Series 5 years ago. And for all the criticism, the scandal of whether or not they cheated their way to a title the last time around, only 5 guys in their active roster were there in 2017. This is a completely new team, and they did this. They forfeited their first and second round draft picks in 2020 and 2021. And sure, maybe those guys wouldn't be in the major leagues anyway by now. But the fact that the Astros have essentially created 80% of another championship roster. You don't do that unless that's not money. Yes, they've spent money, but I mean, fine.
Their payroll is 9th in baseball.
It's not huge. I mean, Justin Verlander is making a ton of money, but
the
other 4 guys are making close to the major league minimum. And to come up with Framber Valdez, Jose Urquidy, Luis Garcia, and Christian Javier. They were all signed within 2 years of each other. They all debuted within 2 years of each other in the major leagues. They were all Latin American development. The one thing we really haven't talked about is the Latin American pipeline that the Royals have, and that has been disappointing for a while. It is not a coincidence that the guy that has been overseeing the Astros Latin American development, a guy named Oz Ocampo, was just hired by the Marlins as their assistant GM. Talk about bringing an assistant. That would have been a really interesting hire for the Royals, to bring in a guy to complement the skills that they already have. A guy who has shown, a very keen eye for talent out of Latin America. The Royals need. I mean, Rene Francisco was maybe ahead of the curve 16 years ago, and the Royals brought in Salvador Perez, Kelvin Herrera, Yordano Ventura, all within the span of 6 months. They brought in more talent in the first 6 months that Dayton Moore and Rene Francisco work together than they have in the 15 years since. They just have. I mean, it's just I was, so optimistic about that recurring Latin American pipeline, and it has dried up. They've got some talent. I love Michael Garcia. There's some guys who are here, but what's really interesting is that all four of those guys who are now part of 4/5 of the Astros rotation, right? Latin American pitchers, pre-arbitration, maybe some of them will be arbitration eligible next year, but none of them were like can't miss guys. A lot. I think, with the exception of one of them, I don't even think they were signed at age 16 when they became eligible. One of them, I can't remember which one. One of them was signed as an amateur at age 21. Like, he didn't even get to the point where he was worth. And that's the thing. When you can sign guys at 16, if you were to have a major league, if you were to have a draft of high school players in America, and we were drafting guys after their sophomore year of high school, do you know how much, like, how many draft hits and misses there would be? Like, you would have guys who taken in the 10th round who 2 years later were like the best prospect in baseball. You'd have first round picks who 2 years later were a complete bust. It is so much more difficult to evaluate talent at 16 than at 18. Just like it's harder to do at 18 than at 21. That's why college players typically have brought back more value in the draft than high school players, pretty much for the entire history of the draft. So the Astros have shown that you don't have to spend, you don't have to give big money to one player. You want to spend big money, but you want to spread it around. And when the Royals have spent the big bucks, yeah, they got Alberto Mondesi. Let's call that a success. All right, the big money. But who else have they spent big dollars on? Elier Hernandez never made it to the majors with the Royals. I think he finally made it with the Rangers. He's a backup at best. Obviously, Eric Pena, their most recent one, huge bust. Jason Guzman, I think, got 7 figures. If you look at all the 7-figure bonuses the Royals have given out, none of these guys, with the exception of Mondesi, has done anything. Whereas Salvador Perez got like 60 grand.
Yeah. There was the Cuban starter early in Dayton's time.
Noel Arguelles, $9 million. Cubans are kind of, because he was considered like major league ready. He had been basically pitching nonstop for like 24 months and blew out his rotator cuff like the minute he joined the organization. Sort of a pass there, but at the same time, yeah, high dollars for a pitcher who had a bum arm, who had been overworked. Those are the things we knew. You couldn't have predicted the rotator cuff, but you could say this guy's been throwing a lot of pitches and we're throwing a lot of money at him. So yeah, just that. If there's one takeaway, it's that spread the money around. If you're going to sign guys, and don't be afraid of signing guys that are late bloomers. They don't all, you can't always see the talent at 16. Sometimes the 18 or 19-year-old, that's a college freshman. Like, guy shows up and he's got talent, he can still develop at that age.
I think the reason why the Astros are World Series winners and the Rays are perennial playoff appearances, but haven't yet won the championship. The Rays are all the 4 cheap guys of the Astros. They don't have, the Astros then have the payroll to then also pay Justin Verlander. Right? That's the difference. And that's the scary part. The Rays let us know that, hey, yes, the Kansas City Royals can compete at the highest level with a small payroll. Right? They can do it. It's going to be very difficult, though, to topple the team that can do all the things you do. Because now the rich guys, we had a time where the Yankees just stupidly kept spending money on guys in their late 30s and had all this dead money. Those teams aren't doing that anymore. Certainly the Astros aren't. The Dodgers aren't. We'll see what happens at the end of Mookie Betts' contract. I find it hard to believe that a 5'9" guy is going to be clubbing the ball over the wall at age 35, 36. Like, when his hands slow down, I think they'll end up with some dead money finally there in that mix. But, the Astros are an example of a team that does all the right things on the cost-effective side, which then gives them lots of money to spend to finish off the roster and to keep the guys that they want to keep. That's the moral of the story from the Astros. But you're right. And knowing pitching, I mean, what was the stat? ESPN Stats and Info had it. The Astros bullpen, first bullpen to throw at least 40 innings in a single postseason and have a sub ERA of 1, have a sub 1 ERA. It's 0.83, 54 innings, almost 54 2/3 innings, 5 earned runs. I mean,
they were better than the 2014-2015 Royals in terms of the aggregate bullpen, right? I might still take, the Royals bullpen just because, the fact that the Royals' 5th reliever was blowing, potentially would blow a game in the 4th inning. The Royals could rely on Herrera and Davis and Holland whenever they needed to. But it's just a testament that the Astros had so much pitching depth, they couldn't help But even though the mop up guy that they brought in with Lance McCullers giving up 5 home runs, even that guy is like nasty as hell. I mean, Ryan Stanek had a 1.15 ERA for them this season in their bullpen. He was like the 5th, maybe not even the 5th reliever. He threw 3 innings total in the entire postseason. And he was on. It's not like he was hurt. They used him for 3 innings, and of course, 3 innings, no hits, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts. But he barely pitched because they have so much talent.
And who was it that came in? Was it Ronel Bianco? No, it wasn't Blanco. Who came in and threw that, like, the 3 innings of shutout baseball after the McCullers?
Was it? I actually think it might have been one of their starters who came in. Was it Urquidy maybe? Let me see, because they put a guy in the bullpen. Yeah, I believe it was Jose Urquidy. This is look. All you need to know about the Astros is Jose Urquidy threw 164 innings this year. All right, had a 3.94 ERA. It was a league average pitcher. He would have been the number 2. He was better than Zach Greinke, maybe close to Zach Greinke in terms of value. He pitched in 1 game in the entire postseason, and it was it was a mop up after they were down 7-0, and of course it was 3 scoreless innings, and he was on he wasn't needed in either the ALDS or the ALCS. This is a starter that would have been like, at worst the number 3 starter for the Royals, and just they didn't need him. That's how good they are. So, but look, the Astros, we'll talk about this maybe more next week when we talk about the Phillies, I think. But the goal here, like the Astros are, you could look, if you think of them as an unattainable goal, that's fine. The Royals don't need to attain that goal. They don't need to win 106 games. They need to you want to make the playoffs. The Phillies model is instructive as well. But what you take from the Astros is figure out how they identify pitching, especially in Latin America, how they develop pitching, because the biggest impediment, the biggest obstacle between where the Royals are now and being a contender is developing their pitching. Yeah. And I think they're going to try.
Yeah,
at least they're going to try.
Yeah, they're putting hopefully the mechanisms in place to do it. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Kaufman Corner for the good doctor, Rany Jazayerli, one of the. Remember, if you're catching us via the podcast, you can catch the stream live. We went at Monday at 10. Normally, we're Sundays at 10 p.m. Central when the Chiefs don't play on Sunday Night Football. So we'll be back on Sunday. They play at noon next week, so we'll be back on Sunday at 10 p. Central. You can catch us and be a part of the conversation in the chat room on the YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. So if you're catching us via podcast, be a part of the conversation in the chat room, as we had many of our regular friends with a lot of great comments, as they always do. So thank you very much. For Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro. You can catch my show at Sports Radio 810 WHB. That's 810WHB.com. We will see you next week here on Kaufman Corner.